Welcome to Restore, a podcast seeking to restore the vision, restore the mission, restore the church. And now your host, Javier Diaz.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Restore podcast. My name is Javier. I'm your host, and this is episode 104. On today's episode, I'm so happy to have Pastor Ken Wetmore with me. He's the senior pastor of the WholeLife Church, which was formerly known as Florida Hospital Church. Previously to Pastor Ken becoming the senior pastor about 3 years ago, WholeLife's senior pastor was Pastor Andy McDonald, who was there for 37 years before Pastor Ken came. I spoke with Pastor Andy way back, if you can believe it, in episode 5 in 2016. So if you want to go and get a bit deeper in the history of WholeLife Church, make sure to check out that episode. The link is in the show notes. In this conversation with Pastor Ken, I love that we took a deep dive into his personal faith journey, his calling to pastoral ministry, what it was like transitioning to WholeLife, following someone who had been there for such a long time, and we speak of so many other aspects as well. I pray that you will be blessed and challenged as you listen. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Pastor Ken Wetmore. Pastor Ken Wetmore, welcome to the Restore podcast.
Why, thank you very much, Javier. Good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, man. In full transparency, people always ask me as I'm going up and down Florida and blessed to do what I do, but they often ask me, so what church do you have your membership in? And I tell them, WholeLife Church. And so I have had previously Pastor Andy on many years ago, but it's great to have Pastor Ken, my pastor now here at the WholeLife Church. Though, again, in transparency, because of my travel and what I do, I am not often at WholeLife Church. So
but we consider you a very good member, though, because one of the things that we do at WholeLife is have a lot of digital content. We really try to make sure that for people like you who aren't able to be in church, even though they want to be.
Yes.
Or actually, you're in church every week, I'm pretty sure, but not at our church. How about that?
Correct.
I'm always amazed. You know what's going on. You're watching the messages. You're watching the church services. So you're a part of WholeLife for sure.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I do listen and watch online, and people obviously can't see, but we are recording in the studio here, and the master Randy is doing the tough work of recording us here, and he has to sit here and listen to this whole thing before it actually posts. And so thank you, Randy, for being part of it. He doesn't have a mic on him right now, but he's saying he's saluting, saying thank you for recording here. And you guys have a pretty nice little studio here, really comfortable chairs, and so man, I may have to continue just to come in here and do this again.
Yep. Just let us know. But Randy's looking to start, growing at his podcast kingdom. So
sure. And we're going to get to that. We're going to get to the podcast that you guys have here as well, and put that on the show notes and encourage people to listen. But Ken, let's start from the beginning, as we always do here on the Restore podcast. And it's one of the questions that those that listen regularly know that I'm going to ask my first-time guest 100% of the time at this point. Tell us, Ken, about your faith journey and your call to pastoral ministry and how you ended up pastoring WholeLife Church.
How long is your podcast?
Man, this is long format, so I have as long as you have.
Well, I want you to keep your listeners, so we'll try to condense it a little bit. So I think one of the interesting things for me is that on my dad's side of the family, we go back about as far in Adventism as you possibly can. There's a Millerite preacher back there somewhere that's part of my dad's family chain of things. And the other interesting thing is that on my mom's side, my mom is the only Seventh-day Adventist in her entire family, and so being raised, it was an interesting thing, kind of having one parent that has this long history with the Adventist Church, and another person who has, just came into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And my mother became a Seventh-day Adventist when she was 16. Her family was not in favor of it, and it really cost her quite a bit when she made that decision. So being raised that way, it was an interesting experience for me growing up that way. I would say I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian Adventist home, and went through Adventist education. And the interesting thing for me was I don't really know that for me that it was a lot more than trivia for a long time. And then I had some experiences in my life that I'd been following the rules. I got to a place where I quit following the rules for a little bit, and it really had made me reevaluate what my relationship with God was. And it happened while I was in college. I was at Southern Adventist University, and I really had this moment at the school where I really experienced Christ in a different way than I'd ever experienced Christ. It became a lot more personal. And so for me, one of the things from my journey with Jesus is that there wasn't really this one moment where all of a sudden everything fell into place. There's just been these moments where you just kind of, I feel like they're more like way markers on the journey.
Yeah.
Than I would say, like, this, Saul of Tarsus becoming Paul, on the road, and there's this giant light, and I always used to envy people who had that experience, because it wasn't, I was like, wow, it must be really cool to like have that. But as I've gone through my life, I've become to really appreciate the gradual way that Christ has continued to grow me, and to this day continues to grow me on that journey.
Sure.
Another very pivotal moment for me in my Christian journey came because of my brother. And, he's given me permission to talk about this, so I'm not going to be telling you anything that he wouldn't be okay with me saying out loud. But my brother struggled with drug addiction for a number of years. And, it really came to one of the darker moments was as I was beginning pastoral ministry. And I was really grappling with bitterness and anger at my brother for what I perceived was the way that he was hurting my parents and our family. In the rearview mirror, I realized that had a lot more to do with me being angry about him making me uncomfortable than it had to do with me caring about him. And again, this pivotal moment came. I was just so angry at him, and it was this moment where I was feeling all this tension and anger. And one of my mentors, Dave Livermore, I don't know if you know Dave at all, but
I do.
Dave invited me to attend Global Leadership Summit. And I didn't want to go. And Dave was like, you need to go. So I went with Dave, because when Dave tells you need to do something, you listen to Dave. And so I went with him, and that particular year, Tim Keller was one of the featured speakers. I don't remember anybody else. I just remember Tim. And I think he had just written The Prodigal God, and he gave a talk on that. And it was one of those mind-blowing moments. It's one of those way markers that I'm talking about that really shifted my perspective, because the funny thing was, about 2 months before this, I had preached a sermon on the prodigal son, and I almost wanted to vomit when I was preaching it, because so angry at the story. And I was only preaching it because I was preaching on the parables of Jesus, doing a series on that, and how do you leave this one out? And I did my best to get through it, but I just felt so angry at Jesus for this story where the older brother's the villain and the younger brother is the hero. And the younger brother comes home. Jesus doesn't, the father doesn't challenge him, doesn't be like, have you changed? And I've watched my brother do this cycle with my parents over and over and over again. Oh, he's better now. Let's have a party. Everything's good. Oh, he got baptized. Yay. Everything's good again. And it's this cycle. And Jesus tells this story, and it made me, I got done. I just remember feeling like I wanted to vomit through the whole sermon, because I was so angry at it. And when I listened to Tim's sermon on the same topic, and then I immediately bought the book and read it, it just changed my life. It just changed my life, because I realized how my little brother wasn't the only person who was lost. I was too. I was allowing anger and bitterness and a sense that I was better in some way, which if you know my background, I'm no better. I have just different problems. I have different things that have been in my life. And I was allowing my own self-righteousness to get in the way. And, not to get, if you haven't read the book, not to get in the way of you reading it, but the punchline basically is that both of these sons had disappointed their father. Neither one of them had done what the father wanted. The older son, Tim says that in the culture in that time, it was the older son's responsibility to go look for the younger son and say, hey, dad's waiting for you at home, wants you to come home. All is forgiven if you want to come home. And so when the older son at the end of that parable says, haven't I done all these years what you've asked me to do? The answer is no, you haven't. You haven't been doing what the father really wanted you to do. You've been doing what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it really hit me hard what a hypocrite I was, how I wasn't being loving to somebody in my life that I should be loving to. And it really changed things around. And I'm super grateful that, that in our case, in our family, we're fortunate enough to have a happy ending to that story, and that my brother has, he's been in recovery for, more than a decade now, doing great, runs his own business, successful business, beautiful children, beautiful family.
Yeah.
So we're fortunate that way. But if it hadn't turned out that way, I also know that I would have needed to trust God through that, and I would have still needed to be loving to my little brother and love him. There's accountability that needs to take place, obviously, but the bitterness and anger did not need to be there. And so that was a huge pivotal point in my walk with Jesus. So I'd say that's a little bit of my journey with Jesus, and every day continue it. Every day learn something new about Jesus and His love, and I'm grateful to serve a grace-filled Savior who loves me as I am and calls me to grow and do better. Not because it makes Him love me more, but because it makes my life better and makes me a better person in the community that I live in. So a little bit on the professional side of things. In college, I double majored in public relations and theology, and got to near the end of my junior year. They gave all the theology majors at that point. They would give a kind of an inventory to talk about your personality inventory type of thing that was supposed to measure you against successful pastors, and whether you have the personality of
an assessment.
Yeah. And I'll never forget my advisor in the theology department calling me in, and he said, well, you can't really fail these, but you did. So,
really encouraging.
Yeah. He said, you don't have the right personality to be a pastor. And the reason you don't is that the assessment came back and said, you are off the chart when it comes to being anti-authoritarian. He said, and that won't work well for you in denominational employment. And so he said, you can finish your major. I see that you're finishing your junior year. It'll probably, if you're doing both these majors, it'll take you probably another 3 semesters to get through. But when Seventh-day Adventist conferences come to interview you, we're not going to give you a good recommendation. We're not going to recommend you. So that will probably hurt you in your ability to find something. And being the fact that inventory was absolutely correct, that I was anti-authoritarian, I was like, who cares? I don't need you anyway. I'm out. So I dropped down to the world's strongest minor in theology or religion that you've ever seen, because I'd already taken Greek and, biblical exegesis and homiletics. And so I'd taken a lot of the classes that you wouldn't do as a religion minor. And I remember at the time I told the Lord, I said, look, I do not like hanging out with all these theology people. I never really enjoyed it. Didn't particularly care for the religion department at that point. And so I don't want to go to seminary, but if you ever want me to be a pastor and you find some church that asks me to be a pastor and I don't have to go to seminary, I won't turn it away. And that's my way of, now I'm going to go make money and, work in communications and have a good time. With that said, my wife and I decided we wanted to go ahead and do something adventurous. We got married in the middle of our Christmas time, our senior year. And we decided we wanted to go do something adventurous before we had kids. So we looked around the world, and I'm not very good at languages. I took Greek twice, not because I enjoyed it. And so I thought, well, where can I go and speak English? Since I stink at everything else, I'm very American that way. And what can I do? And so one of my best friends was on the island of Guam. He was the station manager at the Seventh-day Adventist FM radio station.
Okay.
And he said, hey, man, you should come out here. You could be the assistant communication director for the mission, and then you could be, raise money for the FM radio station. And the mission said that would be fine. My wife is a teacher, and so she was hired to teach at Guam Adventist Academy. And so we went there on what was supposed to be a 2-year tour. Turned out I was anti-authoritarian. It turned out that it was a miserable experience for everybody involved.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Very early on, I burned bridges. I could say more, but I'll just say, I'll own my side of of the fence. That there, I burned bridges, and I was definitely young, very confident. Some might call it arrogant. In fact, that's probably exactly what it was. Had all the answers. Wasn't particularly interested in what other people had to think about things, and therefore reap the consequences of that. So, and did that pretty quickly too. I think I had it down in about 6 weeks. So it was a long year and 10 months after that. But I'm not a quitter. So I saw it through. And the one kind of piece of joy in my life was that, and there's a little pun in there because I was working at Joy 92, it was the FF station. The one piece of joy was that I started doing a morning drive show on that radio station, and I just loved the radio side of things. Okay. Just loved it. It was so rewarding and just had so much fun doing it. Well, at the end of the 2 years, I knew I wasn't going to be staying, and so we started looking for work back in the States. And the Salvation Army on Guam heard that I was leaving, and I'd done some work with them in connection with the FM radio station. And they're like, hey, would you like to come do communications for us? And I was like, yeah, because they paid pretty well. And I was like, yeah, that sounds really great. And they said they were going to hire me. That's great. Rochelle signed on for another year at Guam Adventist Academy because she's not anti-authoritarian. She was doing great. And as soon as she signed the contract to stay at Guam Adventist Academy, like literally 1 or 2 days later, got a phone call from the Salvation Army, said, hey, we were going to pay for your position with a grant. The grant fell through. We don't have anything for you. And it was one of probably the most devastating time periods of my life because I all but begged the mission to keep me on because I had nothing else. And they were like not interested in it. And thank goodness they weren't. And so I'm out trying to find jobs, Guam's a territory of the United States, but it's got its own culture and its own way of doing things.
Right.
It's the first time in my life that I experienced what it meant to be discriminated against based on the color of your skin. I literally was applying for a sales job, and they said, well, you got the right experience, you've got the right education, but you're not the right color to be doing sales here. And yeah, that was a wake-up call for me about how frustrating that must be, for so many other people who have gone through far worse than that to, experience that. So I'm out desperate trying to find something. And I remember being so angry at God. I was so angry. I was like, I graduated from my college with, distinction. I had all these awards and I was student association president and I had all this great future ahead of me. And now, I don't have a good job recommendation from, here. And, I'm going to be lucky if I can wait tables at this point. Nothing's opening up. And you've literally, it's like the children of Israel in the wilderness, you brought me here to die. You've just killed me professionally. And here I was trying to do you a favor by giving you 2 years of my life before I went out and made money and did what I wanted to do. I was so angry at God. I remember vividly being in bed one night and just sobbing and crying with Rochelle next to me and just being like, just God's brought me here to die. And just kept getting rejected everywhere I went looking for a job. And I really wanted to get a radio job, but I just didn't have the right background or experience, even though I'd been doing the little FM Adventist radio station, just didn't have quite the right amount of experience. And I remember going into the major radio broadcasting company on the island. It's named Sorensen Pacific Broadcasting. And the president of the company was a guy named John Anderson. John was the morning drive for the talk radio station. John is like was the Larry King of Guam. I mean, everybody knew who he was. He was a big deal, really big deal. I mean, I remember being in awe when I got to go into his office and talk to him and beg him for a job. And John, said, well, you want to do, maybe you'd like to do like late night jock stuff on because they had three stations. They had Top 40, Classic Rock, and a news talk station. So maybe you could do like late night on the Top 40 station. And I said, man, I really appreciate that, but I don't think I'm going to be your guy, because that station was more of a shock jock kind of thing. And that, being Christian, I don't think that's really going to work for who I am. And so John was like, well, that's what I got. And I said, well, look, if there's anything else, particularly on the talk radio side of things, I said, I'll do janitorial work if it'll get my foot in the door. And he said, well, I really will. I'll do anything besides compromise my morals.
Right.
And John said, okay, well, thanks. See you later. And so I was shocked a couple of weeks later when I got a phone call from him. He said, hey, you said you'd do anything. I said, I did say that. So I'm waiting for, what janitorial job. And he said, firstly, you need to know the job only pays $8 an hour. It's part-time, and it's in our newsroom. And as soon as he said newsroom, I was like, oh, okay. I mean, $8 isn't the greatest. Part-time isn't what I was hoping for, but it's working in the newsroom, that's on air. That's better than, that's pretty good. I'll take that.
It's your foot in the door.
That's a big foot in the door. That's, the body's in the room at that point. And he could hear me getting these things. He goes, no. He goes, you don't understand. It's not what you think. And I said, well, what am I not understanding? He said, well, it's an all-female newsroom. I said, I don't care that. Right. It doesn't bother me. He's like, well, it should. He said, men don't last in there. I said, well, he's like, no. He said, I know you think you're different. You're not. He said, I've never had a guy last more than 6 weeks in that newsroom. They always quit. They're always angry. It doesn't work. But he said, what I will do is if you want an interview, I'll ask them to interview you, but I'm not, that's as far as it goes. I'm not going to help you any further than that. If you get the job, you get the job. And when you hate it, don't blame me on your way out. I said, okay. So I went in to interview with them, and it was one of the most surreal interviews I've ever done. The news director is sitting there in between the other two associates. And they're up on stools, and they put me in a chair where I'm just looking up at them. So immediately I'm like, okay, this is what John's talking about. I see what's going on here. And they quickly look over my credentials very quickly. And then they said, so you're a 7-day Adventist, right? And I said, yeah, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And I thought, well, you can't really ask that, can you? But I guess you can. It's, so whatever. And I'm waiting. I know what's coming. They're going to ask me about whether I'm willing to work on Sabbath. It's news. It's 24/7. And I know my answer is going to be, I don't work on Saturdays. So I don't, from an hour before sundown on Friday, an hour after, I'm going to lose this job too. And the news writer said, so do you smoke? No. Drink alcohol? No. Do you cuss? Try not to. She said, well, they look at each other, and she goes, well, we do all those things. Is that going to bother you? And I know God gave me the right words at that moment, because I just said, hey, do you expect me to do those things with you? And she said, and they look at each other again. No. I said, I genuinely just want a job. I don't care what you do. I won't do those things, but I don't mind being around you while you're doing them or whatever. I want to work. And if you give me a shot, I promise you won't be sorry you did. So a couple of days later, they gave me a call and said, we've given you the job. It turned out to be full-time, still $8 an hour, but it was a full-time job. And, just the most amazing experience. Those ladies were so good to me. I don't know what went wrong with all the other guys before me, but they treated me like a little brother. They taught me everything about the news business. They were just so incredibly good to me. And what was crazy was about 6 months into this.
Now, what year was this around?
This was going to be 2001-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, 2001-ish. Yeah, that's right. It was 2001 because I was there during 9/11. I was doing news for them during 9/11.
Okay.
And which was surreal on Guam because I literally was woken up in the middle of the night by my father-in-law calling and saying America's under attack, and run down to the station, and everything's up on the TV.
Yeah.
And anyway, that was surreal. But one of the other things that happened about 6 months in was that one of the biggest trials that had happened in the island's history started happening. One of the governor's closest friends, lieutenants, was put on trial by the federal government for stealing money from FEMA. And my boss said, do you want to be the reporter that covers that every day? And I said, I do. That I love courts, so this will be, yeah, totally. So they gave me this prime time. I'm literally doing updates on the trial every hour on all their stations. So very high profile. And this I don't remember how long it went on. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks of this trial. And my heart sank again on the first day of the trial when the judge said, this trial, I want to get through it as quickly as I can, because they're sequestering the jury because of how political this thing was. And he said, I want to get through this. So it's going to be Monday through Saturday. And so I went back to the station. I said to my boss, I said, I don't work Friday night through Saturday night. So she said, that's all right. She said, I'll cover it for you on Saturdays, and you just cover it the rest of the week. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. So sure enough, that's what happens. And at the end of the trial ends, jury starts to deliberate. And I think they started deliberating on like a Wednesday or Thursday. I go, please, dear Lord, let them come up with and my heart sank on Friday when we were called into the courtroom, and the judge said, the jury has told me that they have come to a verdict, and we will announce it tomorrow. It's like, I've covered this thing the whole way. I'm not going to get to cover the verdict. And crazy thing was, so I went back to station, and my news director, just love her to death, Mana, said, well, Ken, why don't you just get a note from your pastor or your priest and saying that it's okay? You've covered this for 3 weeks. She said, I don't mind covering that. I've been covering on Saturday, but I don't want to take that away from you. I mean, this has been your thing. I don't want to take that away from you. And I said, no, Mana, that's not how it works for me. If I went and covered it, my pastor wouldn't. There'd be no implications for me from the church side of things. This is my own. I'm my own pastor. This is my walk with Christ. I do this because this is what I believe. And if I were to go cover this, what would that tell you about what I believe about this? That when it's convenient for me, to get out of work on Saturday, that I do it. But when there's something big that's good for me, that I will go do it. I said, that's not how I do things. And she's like, oh, okay. So I find out, on Sunday, I think from her, that the craziest thing that had happened was the judge, I can't remember that this came down on Friday late afternoon or Saturday, but basically the jury came back to the judge and said, hey, we've been sequestered for 3 weeks. We've been staying in a nice hotel. We'd like our families to come spend the weekend with us in the hotel. You could do that for us since we've been sequestered for 3 weeks. And this judge is not like, he was a hard judge. He was a very hard judge. He was like, okay.
Wow.
So he let the families come and stay with them Saturday and Sunday, and then they did the verdict on Monday. Craziest thing. And I've always just believed, Javier, that, the Bible says that God honors those that honor him. And for me, that was just, I can tell you several other instances of making those kind of decisions where it just felt like God really, working a business that's 24/7 and really choosing to go ahead and keep the beliefs that I have that matter to me, that have meaning to have a Sabbath, where God just really did things that were really to my benefit. And so what came out of this whole trial was that the local television station, which is KUAM News NBC affiliate on the island of Guam, they called me up after the trial and they said, hey, we've been listening to your coverage. How would you like to come make more than $8 an hour and do television news for us? And I said, no. I said, I couldn't find a job anywhere. Nobody was offering me a job in K57. Sorensen Pacific gave me a job. So I'm loyal. So the answer is no. And I remember telling Mana, my boss, this, and I said, you're not going to believe, KUM called up and offered me a job. And she said, what did you say? And I said, well, I told him, no, I'm loyal. You guys gave me a job when no one else would. And she looked at me and she had, I'm giving you the redacted version of what she said, but she said, you're dumb. She said, are you crazy? She said, $8 an hour doesn't buy loyalty, Ken. And she goes, I don't want to see you go. I love you. I don't want you to go, but you'd be a fool not to do this for yourself and for your wife and for your future family. She said, you're not going to get this kind of opportunity elsewhere. You can go do television news. You can make good money. I don't want you to go, but you owe it to yourself to go interview for that. And that was a leadership lesson that has always stuck with me, that she cared more about me than she did about her own comfort. Because if she would have been like, good for you, the loyal, you should have been, I would never have taken that. I would never have gone and done it because I was so grateful to them for the job after not being able to find a job.
That's great.
And she cared more about me. And so that's something that really mattered. So I did get the job and, same parameters that I told them, I'm not available from an hour before sundown to an hour after sundown. They hired me anyway. And about 3 months into being there, I got a call from the news director and she said, hey, would you like to anchor the 10 o'clock news? There's been something that's happened that we needed, to move somebody in the 10 o'clock spot. I said, oh, I'd love to, but I'm not available on Friday nights. So Monday through Thursday, I don't think that's probably what you're looking for. And she said, well, let me think about it. Came back and said, you know what? We're going to we're going to have you do it Monday through Thursday, and we'll have a weekend anchor do Friday nights. And we'll do it that way.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was floored. So a year after that, got the phone call from her again saying, hey, news director, hey, do you want to 6 o'clock male anchors leaving? Would you like to take on the 6? And I said, I would. But again, I'm not available Fridays. And she's like, well, but the sun doesn't go down until, varies from 6:30 to 7:30. So you could probably do, at least for part of the year, you could do 6 to 6:30 or 6:45, maybe even 7. And I said, yeah, but I've said an hour before and I don't want to be rushed. Sabbath's a big deal to me. I don't want to be rushed going in. Don't want to be rushed coming out. And she said, well, let me go talk to the owner of the station. This is a big, this is the face of the station. Let me go talk. And she came back and said, the owner said that whatever you want, he wants you to be the 6 o'clock anchor. So the news director was also the female anchor for the co-anchor. And so she said, I'll just solo anchor on Fridays and we'll have you anchor Monday through Thursday. And so that was an incredible time period for my family. We had our first child there on the island. It was kind of a cool thing. We wanted to raise awareness for prenatal care. So we did we called it the Daddy Diaries, where we documented our, process of preparing for Kyla to be born and everything from how we chose the name to, ultrasounds and all that good stuff. And Rochelle agreed was very gracious to go along with that. And we she was, so Kyla was not born on live TV, but she was born on TV. So she,
you had the footage.
We had the footage, and my best friend was the videographer for that. And Rochelle was like, he's the only videographer that's allowed in the delivery room. And he was phenomenal. Like you could have shown any of the footage that he shot anywhere.
Yeah.
It was because he did such a good job with his angles and everything. It was phenomenal. So anyway, fantastic time. I was having the time of my life. I covered the military, I covered politics. I got to cover, lots of celebrities would come to the island to, entertain the troops and that sort of thing. So I was having a fantastic time. And then the craziest thing, both Rochelle and I, and again, this is a longer story than I probably want to drag out here, but we just both knew that we were supposed to leave. And we were saying, that's great, God. I'm ready to go be Tom Brokaw, right? He's I think he's getting ready to retire here soon. So let me go do that. And God very audibly said, no, that's not what I want. And we're like, okay, cool. Tell us what. And God said, I'm not going to tell you.
Let me jump in here for a second, just because I love, it's what we do here. It's what I've been doing for a while when I hear people's faith journey. And I just want to jump in here when you say that you heard God say no, right? I've heard and I've experienced that. And you're loving what you're doing. God has blessed what you're doing. You've honored him with the Sabbath. You've made that clear. You've remained faithful and loyal to him and to your values that come from him. And then you say, well, God wanted us to move, to shift. And he said no. And you talked further or previously about these markers. So maybe what was that marker that gave you that clarity, right, of conviction to say, it's time for me to leave this somewhat of a dream job? Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
At that moment. And what was that experience like? Like, what made that clarity to you to say no? Was it a dream? And then I'm not being facetious.
Seriously.
Was it a dream? Was it your wife saying, hey, maybe she told you something?
Yeah.
What was it? Is that a fair question?
No, it's super fair. So for my faith walk, I don't know that I've ever heard God's audible voice.
Sure.
But I guess I define myself as a somewhat kind of intuitive type of personality. And I'll get a feeling and oftentimes when Rochelle and I's feelings really align, then my antennas really go up on that. Mm-hmm. And in this particular case, the way that we started kind of hearing God working our life is doors that open and doors that close. And we were expecting Eric at this point, and we had to make a decision. My contract at the television station was coming up for renewal. So if we renewed it, we were going to pretty much be committed to staying on Guam for another year and a half, for sure. And if we didn't renew it, then we needed to leave before Rochelle got into her third trimester. And so we had to make a decision about what to do there. And so we started thinking about moving, and I got in some really good feedback from a television station in Phoenix about my work, that they really liked it. They thought I was and at that point, I don't know what Phoenix is right now, but at that point they were the number 16 market in the United States, which going from Guam to Phoenix is like going from playing Little League baseball to playing for the Brewers. Okay. It's not, it's a big jump. It's a major. You're not going to do that. Yeah. That's not normal. And the station in Phoenix told me they came very close to hiring me, that they're interested, and they said, just put your tape out to like markets 40 to 60, spend 2 years in one of those, and then we'll get back with us, and we'll probably have a job for you at that point when we can just see that you've worked in a larger market than the one you're in for a little bit. And I sent out my tapes and heard nothing. I mean, it was crickets from everywhere else, just crickets, which was really weird. And so as I was also looking for places to go, I had the communication director for Guam's representative in Congress. They have a non-voting representative in Congress. obviously as 6 o'clock news anchor. So they were like, oh, you might be interested in doing our communication director job, your undergraduate degrees in communication. So this might really work out really well. So I went and interviewed with them, and the chief of staff for the representative, the congresswoman, came back and said, after the interview, he said, we know we want to hire you. We got to decide on the date you're going to be hired and your compensation package. And he said, I'll be back with you after the weekend. Well, in the meantime, another job that I'd looked at was the communication director for the Georgia Cumberland Conference. That position was open. And my pastor from when I was in college was the new president of that conference, Ed Wright. And Ed so I'd never wanted to work for the church again. And I had jokingly said to Rochelle when I heard that job was open, and I said, well, if Ed was the conference president and was interested in me, then that would be about the only thing that would ever make me want to work for the Seventh-day Adventist Church again.
Yeah.
Well, he becomes president, and my wife's like, so you're going to turn in the application? I was like, sure. Why not? I said, I'll humor you there, So I turn it in, and at the same time, I did this interview with Congresswoman's office. And so I think I emailed Ed and said, hey, you're going to just go ahead and pull my name out of your search list. I know that the Congresswoman's office is going to hire me. I'll be hearing back from them after the weekend with the compensation package. I said, and I think I said, where are you at in your process? How far are you away? And he said, well, he emailed back and said, well, we're 10 to 12 weeks away from interviewing. Okay. We've got a process we've got to go through. So it'll probably be about 10 weeks before we do an interview, and another week after that before we make a selection. So we'll just pull my name out then, because this is going to move way faster. I'll never forget. Ed said, well, Ken, pray about it. And I'm just going to ask you to, if you would, leave your name in. And when you get your job offer, if you get your job offer from the Congresswoman's office, at that point, pull your name. But until you get the official job offer with, salary and start date, will you just leave your name in? I was like, Ed, 10 weeks, there's no chance. I know the Congresswoman's chief of staff. There's not a chance on earth that he's not going to be back to me. He's this guy is meticulous. If he says he's going to do it, he'll do it. And so Rochelle and I are praying about this all at the same time. At the same time, KUM comes back and says, so what do you want to stay? And I said, well, Rochelle and I are both really feeling like we're supposed to leave. That's what we're feeling. They said, that is an excellent negotiating tactic. What do you want? And I said, no, it's not about that. And they're like, no, seriously, what do you want? And I said, no, seriously, I feel like we're supposed to leave. And they said, and so they started throwing numbers at me. What about this? What about this? What about this perk? What about that? And so we prayed about it, and we thought, you know what? Let's just put something out there that we only want a 9-month contract, not a 12-month contract, because we want, as soon as Eric's born, we want to have the option to leave if that's what we want to do. Well, KUM came back and said, look, everything else you've asked for money-wise, everything else, we're willing to do everything and add on to that, but it's got to be 12 months. We won't accept less. It has non-negotiable. And I said, well, it's got to be 9. They said, well, then we're not going to be able to get a deal. And so the weeks tick by, and I hear nothing back from the Congresswoman's office, literally nothing. The process, finally, it gets to the point where it's just me and one other person that are going to be interviewing for this job with the Georgia Cumberland Conference. I still haven't heard anything. Rochelle and I, in all of our prayer life, had decided, well, we're moving. We don't have a job, but we're going to move. And so we used the money that Georgia Cumberland Conference paid to fly me back. Then we used our own money to fly Rochelle back, and we literally sold everything that we had that couldn't be put into a box that you mail back to the States, and mailed it to, I think, my family's home in North Carolina. And we got on a plane, and I'll never forget, Javier, at our little going away party, one of our friends, a good guy, he said, not a close friend, but he's like, so where are you going to be working? And I said, I don't really have a job nailed down. And he's like, isn't Rochelle pregnant? I was like, yeah. And you have Kyle? Like, yeah. So what do you mean you don't have a job nailed down? I said, well, I've got 2 potential job offers, but I don't I'm interviewing against somebody for one of them, and the other one I just haven't heard back in 8 weeks. I haven't heard anything, but we just feel like God wants us to move. And there were other things besides these. There's other signs, things that we prayed that were just happening. And I don't want to get into because it would be embarrassing for some people, but it was one of those things that it was just, we saw God opening and closing doors. And so I said, we just think, we trust that God's going to work this out. And I'd never forget, he looked at me and goes, Ken, you know that things don't always work out. And I remember at that moment thinking, I wonder if I am being the stupidest person ever. How irresponsible is this to be moving with no job nailed down, a child on the way? I've got my dream job that's willing to give me whatever to stay. Besides, the only thing they won't give me is a 9-month contract, but for another 3 months.
Yeah.
But I prayed about it and I said, Lord, that's my sign. If I'm supposed to stay, it'll be 9 months. Nope. And they were and it's the weirdest thing, because the truth was, if I'd taken a 9 month, I probably would have stayed for 12 months. I mean, anyway, but that's where God comes into this whole process. And so we literally fly from Guam, no job nailed down. Rochelle's pregnant with our second child, Eric. Kyla in tow to go do a job interview. I don't know who I'm interviewing against. I don't know whether, I don't know whether I'm going to get this job. And I remember I was terrified. I was like, this has got to be one of the stupidest things anybody has ever done. And got off the plane in Atlanta, got a phone call from my parents, and they said, hey, and keep in mind, this whole process, not a word from the Congresswoman's office, not a word. We did a whole going away show for me on, and not a word, these are people that I covered that knew me, not a word from them. And so I'm thinking, well, I guess they just decided no and didn't want to tell me or something. I get off the plane in Atlanta, and my parents, I'm on the phone. They said the Congresswoman's office called us and asked us to let you know that they want you to call them immediately. Now I'm like, okay, what happens if they say, we have a job for you and we want you to start? What do I tell them? Because I'm about to interview in a day or two with the Georgia Cumberland Conference. The Georgia Cumberland Conference isn't a sure thing because I'm interviewing against somebody else. So if I call up the Congresswoman's office now, do I tell them, look, I'm doing an interview, I want to wait? What if they say, well, make your decision right now, or this job is off the table? And I was so scared to call because I thought, well, maybe I just won't call. Maybe I'll just wait for the day, do the interview, and then call them. And I remember having this impression, and again, not audibly hearing God, but the thought came to my mind, do you trust me or don't you? What's the right thing to do? The right thing to do is call up the Congresswoman's office. That's, do you trust me or don't you? So I grudgingly picked up the phone and called, and the chief of staff came on. Sure enough, he said, hey, Ken, congratulations on being done at KUM. Wanted to wait till you're done there before we firmed everything up, but we're ready for you to start on Monday. Here's the pay package. It was gorgeous. Want you to start. You'll be working in Washington, D.C. You'll be rubbing elbows with the who's who. The Congresswoman is super connected with a lot of the big players, even though she didn't have a vote. She was very connected. And he said, so let's go. Start on Monday. And again, heard God say, just be honest. And so I said, well, here's the thing. I'd never heard back from you. It's been 10 weeks. Never heard a word back from you. So you're going to get back to me on the weekend. So I kept my job search going, and I am scheduled to do an interview with the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Georgia tomorrow. And they've paid for my ticket to fly here. And I don't feel like it would be honest for me to go into that interview having already agreed to take your job. Wow. Or making a commitment to you, because I need to be able to go in with an open mind and be able to say that. And I waited for him to curse me out and tell me whatever, because that was his personality. And there was silence. And then he says, well, good for you, Ken. He goes, you've got my job. That you can just go into that interview and not worry about anything. You just go have a good time with that. You're going to take my job in the end, because it's Washington, D.C. versus Georgia. What do they pay you there? And it was like half or less of what he said, so I'm confident you'll take my job. Just go have a good time with your interview. And suddenly, and for me, it became clear as day. I knew I was going to get the job at the Georgia Cumberland Conference in that moment. I knew it was going to happen. And I went into that interview. I like to think I'm a very honest person, but I've never done a more honest interview than that one. Because I was like, here, this is who I am. This is my downsides. These are my upsides. Why I'm good. Why I'm bad.
So let me jump in and ask you here at that very moment when you're in that interview, and I don't know how much you want to open up about it, but in the back of your mind, you're kind of like, well, if this one doesn't work out, I got double the pay and it's set come, Monday. So I got nothing to lose is what I'm getting right here.
Absolutely.
So not that you're going to be disrespectful, but you're more relaxed, if I can say it that way, coming in. Is that fair? Very fair. Yeah.
Super relaxed. Almost hoped I didn't get it because I love politics. I love covering it. But the other side of it was I knew what was going to happen. I knew that God didn't wait for 10 weeks for me not to, and I really feel like that was the only way I would have gone back to work for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I had felt so burned and so hurt by the Seventh-day Adventist denomination organizationally that I had no desire whatsoever to be employed by them again. And so I feel like maybe that's what it took for God to say, the light the light from heaven to, like, this is where you're supposed to be. Because when I did get offered the job by the Georgia Cumberland Conference, I knew that's what I needed, even though it was less money, less prestige. I knew that's where God wanted me. I knew he didn't wait for 10 weeks on somebody who would never make that mistake. Like that it was beyond providential that it worked out that way. And so I took the job, even though I probably, honestly, I would have rather had the job in Washington, D.C. at that point. I didn't, but I knew that God wanted me in this job. And so Rochelle and I had committed after God did the amazing things he did for me coming out of that first job working in radio and television news. I'd committed to God to letting him be in control of my life and guide it. And so that's where we wound up, and working for the Georgia Cumberland Conference completely restored my faith in the organization of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They were so good to me. I got there, I think on the 21st of the month, I started employment for them. The end of that month, I got a full paycheck for the month, and I went into the treasurer's office and said, hey, I think there was probably an accounting error somewhere. So I don't know how much of my paycheck you need to take back, but I don't want to spend anything before you take it back.
Wow.
And the treasurer looked at me and goes, no, there was no mistake. We did that on purpose. We want you. We know that you've been traveling for the last 2 weeks. Your life has been upside down. We want to go the extra mile. It blew my mind. It was such a very different experience than what I'd had. And so again, it just really restored my faith in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination that, there are places that are rough to work at, and there are places that aren't. And it is what it is. And so I loved working that. The people there were phenomenal to work with, and I was bored out of my mind. It was like going from driving NASCAR to being an Uber driver.
Yeah. I was just going to jump in and say, that must have been just a massive, not only shift, obviously, going from, as you said, from NASCAR to Uber driver, but the emotions that were stirring in your heart now, right? Because of what's going on. And so how does that translate and transfer over that you go from there? Because ultimately what you're doing, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're ultimately following the conviction of your heart, right? Of what God is leading you, back to my original question. But then during that journey, as you continue moving forward, and I know part of this though, you end up getting a call to pastoral ministry.
And that's what God was doing out of all of this.
Okay.
That's what God was doing out of all of this, because about a year into being the communication director, I got a phone call from a friend of mine from Guam, whose dad was the ministerial director for the Upper Columbia Conference. And he said, hey, Ken, we'd done a church plant together on Guam. And he said, hey, Ken, my dad hires pastors. You remember that? And he's got this 2-church district. He's been through over 70 names. Nobody's willing to take it. And he asked me if I could think of anybody. He said, I immediately thought of you. And I said, oh, that's funny, Eric. That's cute. And that's very nice. No, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, why not? I said, well, I don't think that your dad would be interested in me. My degree is in public relations. I have a minor in religion. And I said, I'm not going to go to seminary. I'm 30 plus, 2 kids, a wife. And I don't want to go freeze in Michigan for a degree I don't even want. So, and it's completely reasonable for him to want that. I mean, there's nothing unreasonable about that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well, but there's also, you can get your MA in pastoral ministry through Walla Walla or something. You don't even have to. I said, no. I'm not interested in that. Don't want to do it. I've already had a career in communications. This is where I'm at. I don't need to be switching over there. I'm not going to do it. And besides that, I said, I've only been with the Georgia Cumberland Conference for a year, and it's really rude to leave like that. I mean, it's bad form. And he's like, well, and so he said, well, what if you went and asked your conference president what he thought? And I was like, sure. I said, that's a deal. If my conference president says it's okay, then I'll let your dad give me a call. Sure. Because I knew Ed would say no. I mean, I've only been there a year. You got to say no.
Yeah.
So I went to see Ed, and Ed said, Ken, he said, of course we don't want you to go, but Georgia Cumberland Conference has a policy that we don't block calls. So if you want to interview, you can. I said, no, just say no. He's like, I can't. That's not our policy. We don't do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, that's how and the crazy thing was, so his dad, I explained all this to his dad. His dad says, send me a resume and cover letter. I wait past the deadline. My wife said, did you send it in? I said, no, I didn't. And she said, why not? I said, I'm not going to be a good pastor. I'm anti-authoritarian, and I don't think that. And she said, well, are you not doing it because you think God doesn't want you to do it, or because you're scared? And I was like, okay, it's because I'm scared. She said, then send it in. So being me, I waited till she went to bed, and I wrote the world's worst cover letter of all time. It was the worst one. It literally started off, I don't think I'm the right person for this job. Here's 5 reasons why I will be an absolute disaster. Here's 5 reasons why I might be okay. Hit send on the email, sent it in. And next morning, Rochelle got up, said, did you do it? I said, I did. She said, can I read it? I said, you can. She read it, and she looked, and she goes, Ken, you didn't have to be rude. And I was like, well, if God wants me to have the job, then it'll work out.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you didn't have to be that. You didn't have to be that way. Well, when I got the job, she goes, well, I guess God wants you to do this. And so I wound up being the senior pastor at the Upper Columbia Academy Church and the Cheney Church in Washington, outside of Spokane, Washington. Did that for 5 years and just loved it. Just loved it. Good people, great churches. Really appreciated the conference. And it was just a really good experience. They kept their word because I told them I'm not going to seminary. They never pushed it. And during that time, I started working on getting my master's degree in organizational leadership from Gonzaga. Then part of the way through, I got a call to go to Georgia Cumberland Conference to be the youth director there. Finished off my master's degree remotely. And so I'm a very odd person in pastoral ministry. And I don't, as far as educationally, it's not by any stretch of the imagination, is the traditional path there. I am a voracious reader, read tons of theological books, and it's not the same though, as doing that. But, anyway, that's been the road I've been on. So, after, 5 summers at Indian Creek Camp, I became the lead pastor at the, Madison Campus Church, in Nashville, Tennessee. And then I found myself here at WholeLife.
And you've been here for the last 3
years.
3 years. Wow. So let's jump into that then. Let's thank you for really taking us into that journey. And I've said this, I think people are probably tired of hearing me say what I'm about to say again, that I always love to hear people's faith journey, because in yours, you could just see the emotions, the conviction of not only the Sabbath that came over and over again early on there in Guam, but then that conviction to leave Guam, the conviction to leave a well-paying job and, go from, I love your illustration of a NASCAR driver to an Uber driver working for George and Cumberland. All of that. And then go into pastoral ministry when you had never pastored a church, and do that for 5 years in Washington. So now you're going from Georgia, going across the country, then back down to Kentucky 10, doing that, and then coming to this little place called Florida. And of all places, I'm biased, I'm a Florida guy, but of all places, WholeLife, right? One of our bigger churches in the area with this whole different background. And then on top of that, we'll jump into this. You're following Pastor Andy, and he's been on the podcast here many years ago. We'll put that episode on the show notes for those that want to go back to that. And he was the longest serving pastor in a particular district, in a particular church, 37 years, right?
Yeah. Very unusual in an Adventist church.
Very unusual. Right? And so, and for those that may not know, WholeLife, previously known as Florida Hospital, as most knew it for some time. So what was that like? What was that transition like? What can you tell us about that transition? And what are some of the lessons that perhaps you learned through that process of working through somebody who had been so long, so influential, been a blessing in so many different ways, and then coming in with your background into a place like this?
Yeah, it was really different than I thought it was going to be. In fact, when I was being hired to come here, I was talking to the Florida Conference, which is the hiring body for the WholeLife Church,
right? And
talking to Orlando Lopez, who's the vice president for ministerial in the Florida Conference, and I said, well, most times when somebody comes after somebody who's been at a church for 37 years, really well beloved, which Andy obviously was, I said, they're usually a transitional person. They're there for, maybe 2, 3, best case scenario, 5 years. And sometimes they don't even last that long because it's just, it's hard to transition between. I said, so what happens to me if that's me? And Orlando said, we'll take care of you. We'll take care of you. We'll make sure you're okay. And so I really kind of came into this. I wanted it to work. And the thing was, after I did the interview here at the church, I really thought this is going to work. I could feel, it just felt right. And here's what I will say, and especially for those who are pastors listening to this, it really matters what you leave for the next person. It really does. And I think Andy put on a masterclass of what it means to leave a church that's ready for the next leader to come along. I came in here expecting to hear, well, Andy does this, Andy does that. We don't do that. We don't do this. I kind of came in expecting that, and I was blown away at how the staff and the church just immediately embraced me and said, hey, what's your vision? What do you want to do? This is what we've done, but what do you want to do? And, I think that God also gave me enough experience to say, you know what, let's sit back and let me understand things before I start, rearranging everything. Let me be sure I understand things.
Yeah.
But this church was in such a good place. It was, good staff already here, financially solid, understanding what their mission and vision and their values are. And so it was really easy to kind of come in here. And that's the other part that I would really applaud about the process. The process they went about finding a pastor, they really took their time and made sure they found the person that was going to match the culture of this church. Because I don't think it's just any person that would match up with WholeLife, but they took their time and really made sure they found that person, which I'm grateful was me. And for me, it's been one of the easiest transitions I've been in pastoral ministry or job-wise anywhere. And I did not expect that. I expected it to be rough. I expected a lot of opposition. I expected a lot of pushback, and it has been none of those things. And again, I'll credit Andy.
Except for Randy here. He's giving you a lot of pushback. And Randy's laughing, you all. I'm just kidding, okay? So.
Randy is the difficult one here, but no.
So tell us, we appreciate that and we praise God, right? So what I'm hearing you say is that though Pastor Andy was here 37 years, laid this incredible foundation over the course of 3+ almost 4 decades, right? A lot happened here in this area, to say the least, and he was a big part of that, obviously. But in part, what I'm hearing you say is that he also left a culture that was conducive to what would happen next, right?
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it. That's exactly it.
And so they were open to listening to you. What changes in your heart, in your mind, right? And he's smiling as I'm asking this follow-up question. What changes, in fairness, sometimes we focus on the church, right? But what changes had to come maybe in your leadership style, in your way coming into here saying, now that I've been here, I don't know, a month, I got to perhaps rethink some of the thoughts that I had coming in because now maybe something's changed. So how was that process in your heart?
What a insightful question that I want to really give you a good answer back to.
Take your time, no rush.
Yeah. We'll edit all this out.
We'll absolutely edit this. Ted's face. Randy's like, no, we won't.
So I think the changes that I had to make were that I think I had to step up quicker than I expected to with vision and plans. I had kind of planned to sit back for 6 months to a year and just not change anything and just really, really watch. And kind of immediately out of the gate, there was kind of an expectation that I would have plans and have vision and share with the church, the staff, the board, the ideas and vision that I have. And so that was kind of a shift that I had to make. I think some of my ideas about expectations of what church is exactly like shifted a little bit. I wasn't sure how I'd feel about maybe some of the more contemporary practices that WholeLife does. But on the flip side of all of that, I think the other part that was maybe a little bit surprising for me was just how comfortable this was. It just immediately, I don't know if you've ever had a friendship or a relationship that you just immediately you got into and it was just easy.
Yeah.
Just no, it's not that there's no effort in there, but it's not work. It's just you immediately feel comfortable, and things that you were like, well, I'm not sure about this. You're immediately like, but we'll figure it out. So for me, there was a lot. I think I was just surprised at how comfortable I felt immediately here. And so a lot of the shift for me is just that continued journey of being a better leader, being a better follower of Jesus. And so I really love WholeLife.
Well, praise the Lord, as an individual that's part of the ministerial team here, and we always say that one of perhaps the more harder things to do in finding a pastor for a church of any size, whether it's WholeLife, a large church with multi-staff, and we have several of those here in Florida Conference. But really one of the hardest things is to make sure, as through the grace of God and the power of the Holy Spirit, is to find the right fit, right, for a local church. And hey, I don't think anybody claims to have the perfect process.
Right.
But certainly that's always at the top of our agenda, right?
Yeah.
In trying to find somebody. So we praise God that the Lord has blessed for these last 3 years. Perhaps before I go to the next question, I'm gonna shift here a little bit, but I want to just stay here just for one more second. What are perhaps one of the top things that you felt that you changed coming into WholeLife, since they were ready for change?
I'll tell you the first thing that we changed.
Okay.
And that I wasn't ready to change, but I think one of the first things I remember at our first or second staff meeting, the staff said, "So what's something you want to change?" And I said, "No, we don't need to talk about that. I mean, no, but there must be something. What would you change?" And I said, "Well, okay. There is something that I have really, really, really wanted to do since I was pastoring up at Madison campus prior to coming here. I said, I really want to close the office on Monday and make Monday a all-staff day off. So in other churches where I've been, we've been like, hey, we're going to be open 7 days a week, basically. It's,
Okay.
the office isn't open on Sunday, but, as pastors, you're always working on Sundays because there's some event going on Sunday, whether it's a, church social type of thing or a wedding or whatever. There's always something going on Sundays. And so in other places I've been, we kind of, the office, the administrative assistant would come in Monday through Friday. And I said, I really would like to just see the office completely shut on Mondays and all the staff taking Monday off. Because in my experience in other places, what would happen is, if the administrative assistant is in the office on Monday, if another pastor is working on Monday, as the lead pastor, I would wind up getting a phone call from the administrative assistant on Monday. It's my day off, but I'll get a phone call going, hey, Ken, so-and-so just walked in the office and it's really urgent. We wondered, what do we do about this? What do we do about that? Or a pastor would be like, hey, I'm sorry, it's your day off, but I'm out here doing this. And I just wondered really quick about this question. And so I said, I really would like just for us all to take Mondays off. And if you don't want to take it off, I can't make anybody not work, but I don't want text messaging about work. If you want to send an email, you can do that because we have the option of looking at our email box or not.
Right.
But no texting, and the office is closed. And I said, well, let's try it out. And so we tried it out. And I think what was really gratifying about that is about 2 months after that, I had one of our long-term pastors said to me, they said, I have never, in my years of ministry, I've never had a dedicate. I'm beginning to feel rested. I feel like I have a day off and I'm looking forward to it. I'm feeling better and it feels really good. And they said I was a little skeptical about it when we started off, but this has been really good for me and my family.
Praise the Lord. So with that said, let me go back a little bit to your trajectory and ask you a question towards that. And this is what I mean. So obviously your trajectory, communications has been at the top, right? That's has been your foundation. So what are some of the lessons that you would say you've learned through working in communications, as you detailed earlier, that have helped you now as a pastor? And along with that, I'm going to ask back-to-back questions and then let you go at it. How can we, not just you, but through your experience, how can we communicate the gospel in a way that can potentially have a stronger reach in today's culture? So one is about leadership lessons through the essence of communication and everything that you learned in your experience there in the church setting as a pastor, but then communicating the gospel as a pastor. How can we do that better?
Mm-hmm. So I think after being in pastoral ministry for 17 years now, 90% of what pastors do is communication.
Yeah.
Whether it's preaching, whether it's visiting somebody in their home, in a hospital, going out for a meal, whether it's writing a devotional or putting together a podcast, I'd say easily 90% of what our function is a communication function. And so for me, educationally, I've told my children, I said, if you ever went into pastoral ministry, I'd really encourage you to double major. Get something else that gives you background. As much as I appreciate the theology programs at universities, if you are just a straight theologian, you will wind up not being a pastor for long. Because if you cannot communicate the gospel, it doesn't matter what you know about it. And so I think that, for me, I'm a little bit biased towards communication, but I think that whether you got a business degree as well, there's so much business that goes into running a church. And I think that it's been my observation that it feels like oftentimes pastors come in very ill prepared for the business side of things and some of the communication side of things when they kind of have to find it by trial and error. And there are those that are just naturally gifted at it, that read and figure out what they need to figure out, and then those that wind up not staying in pastoral ministry very long. Because you think about my degree is in communication, it's in public relations. Well, what's being a pastor? It's working with people.
Yeah.
It's helping people know Jesus. It's helping them get along with each other.
Yeah.
It's seeing them through difficult times. So
Yeah.
for me, the communication side of things is super important. But one of the turning points in my life is also been realizing that communication, the most important kind of communication isn't the giving of information, it's the receiving of information. That we often put a high value on speaking and being articulate. But there's, I think, a higher value on being able to listen.
Yeah.
And process the information that you're receiving.
Yeah, and just to jump in here, Dr. Heather Thompson-Day, she's been on the podcast several times, and obviously a communication major. She's making a big transition now in her life. But with that said, I've heard her say many times, and I believe she said it here in one of the times she was on the episode, that communication often, and I'm saying it in my words, but you just said it yourself, right? Communication is often seen as what we are speaking.
Right.
But really, communication is more about how we are listening. Is that?
I firmly believe that, and I think that going to that second part of the question that you asked, how can we be more effective? I think that if it's okay to pick on the mother that I love, which is my church, the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, I think that we have had a real focus on communicating information and a little bit less of a focus on receiving information from the people that we're trying to reach out to. And because we have a lot of good information to share, it's like when you asked me to tell you my story, I went on for a long time because I have a lot of fun things that I feel passionate about and want to share with you. And I want you to hear this. And yet, Javier, how much more important is it to know what your story is if we're going to be in a relationship, if we're going to be friends? How important is it for me to not just tell you what's important to me, but to recognize that you've got a story. There's important things in your life that will teach me and inform me. And I think that the church could do better at listening rather than telling people, here's what you need to know, now believe. Listening to people and say, what is it that's missing in your life? Where's the hurt? Where's the pain? What's going on? What do you need? What do you really need from us? Are you needing to understand the Sabbath, or are you needing to understand grace? Are you needing to understand how to make it through a difficult marriage? Are you needing to understand how to get through the loss of somebody that's so important to you that you're angry at God, but you shouldn't be angry at God, or you think you shouldn't be angry at God, and you don't know how to process that. And here I'm trying to tell you about the state of the dead. Well, let me tell you what happened to that person that you love. Maybe that's not really because I'm not listening. I don't really know what it is that you're not struggling with where they're at. You're struggling about how do you process a God that allowed this tragedy into your life. You're sitting there like Job saying, I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you doing this to me? And so I think that we would do well to listen more. I think we'd do well to be less insecure about our beliefs when people disagree with us, rather than immediately firing back 15 proof text. To not be defensive and say, oh, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that with me. I appreciate hearing that. Are you interested in hearing my response, or did you just want to share that with me? I think that we prove, we live in a time period. I think that we have to update our methods a little bit, because I think that maybe when my mom was becoming a Seventh-day Adventist, it was very logical and fact-based. And that's what people wanted. They show me and I'll believe. And today, I think that the difference is people still say, show me and I'll believe, but what they're asking you to show them is why it's better in your life. Yeah. Why does keeping the Sabbath make a difference for you? How does that make your life better? How does it make my life better if I do it? I mean, if I lose my job, how's that making my life better because I did that? How's it impacting your life? it's been fascinating to me that in the Bible studies that I do with people, when I first started pastoring, it was a lot of the proof text stuff and now more and more people will go, yeah. But why does that make my life better? How does that impact my life? How does that make me a better person? How does that make me a better dad, mom, brother, sister, contributor to my community? And by the way, what is your church doing in our community? Is your church doing something other than meeting on Saturday mornings? Do you guys do anything to make the world around you a better place? And when we say, well, yeah, we are doing a better job by telling about Jesus, they're like, and how's that? Because Jesus healed people, Jesus fed people, Jesus did a lot. So how are you being like that? And so I think those are the things that I see when it comes to communicating with the world. I think that we have to do something harder than be able to prove our beliefs from the Bible. The harder thing is to actually live our beliefs in a way that makes it look like we're not miserable.
I appreciate that. And I think it's a great challenge, right? That necessity organizationally, locally, if we're fair, right? As church members, when we say the church, we're talking about people, right? Obviously. And so from the local level all the way down to administrative levels is for all of us to, quote, communicate better by listening better. And you have a saying that you almost always finish off saying, I loved you, church, now go love your world.
Yeah.
Would you say that one of the best ways to go love your world is to actually listen to the world? Right?
I would totally believe that. Listen to the world and then meet the need where it's at.
Yeah. Because I think this is just my 2 cents, my experience. For example, and I've said this before in the podcast, after doing over 100 of these, people sometimes may say, going back to hearing your story, you always ask that question. You spend a lot of time sometimes in allowing people and staying silent. And I say, actually, I've learned that way because I'm listening to somebody's story, whether it's the big testimony, and you can fill in the blank what that may be big for you or for anybody listening, or just a testimony that maybe, isn't necessarily somebody who had an addiction or whatever it may be. And we have those stories as well. I've had Richie Halverson on and many others in their own stories. But the point is to listen to that person's story no matter what, like you were saying. And again, this is my just 2 cents. I think just over the course of time and perhaps in our culture, and you can speak into it, that essence of actually sitting and listening to people for more than 5 minutes. You and I had lunch before coming here, just sitting there one-on-one and listening to each other, listening to you and your thoughts, and hopefully listening to a few of the stories I was saying, right? Mm-hmm. I think sometimes that's what we're missing maybe in our churches, maybe just in society as a whole, because everybody is, and again, I'm meaning to pick on this here, but we're on our screens, right? And or we're in a rush, or there's just many things going on, or it's just hard for us to focus. And so with all of that said, what are your thoughts about that, and how are you empowering, let's go back here to WholeLife, how are you empowering WholeLife to go out and love the world by being better listeners, beginning with me, because, hey, I'm a member of WholeLife Church.
Well, let me help you, Javier. I think that one of you kind of mentioned the little tag that I do at the end of the sermons or at the end of the church service where I say, I love you, family, go love your world.
Yeah. Which I love that, by the
way. But for me, it's more than just a throwaway or a catchphrase or something like that. It kind of goes down to the essence of what I believe. I believe that people love by being loved and having love demonstrated to them. And so one of the things that I'm hoping is happening here at WholeLife is that we're teaching people how to do better at loving, and what that looks like. And that rather than, having events that we invite people to, that it becomes more of every day is an event, that every opportunity is an opportunity for me to be Jesus to the person sitting across from me, whoever they are, whether that's at work. I think that matters especially to me, having not always worked in pastoral ministry, having worked in a secular, very, very secular environments. I know what it means to work with people who have zero interest in Christ, and I know exactly what it means to work with somebody, had somebody very close to me that had zero interest in my faith whatsoever until they started going through a divorce. And then all of a sudden they became very interested. They wanted to talk. They wanted to hear. I remember they started saying, when we were driving places, we'd drive a lot of places together. They say, hey, could we, the person, I've never been into the Bible. I don't understand the Bible. I said, well, you want to listen to it on CD because it was back in the day. And they're like, sure. At that point, they were ready to do it. They'd say, yeah, I'd like to do that. And so we started listening, and they'd hit pause. And, well, what does it mean when it says this? What does it mean when it say that? And just having those conversations. And that's a conversation that no matter whether you're a pastor, whether you work in IT or accounting or wherever it is that you, janitorial, wherever it is that you work, you can have you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be a trained person with a theology degree to be able to have communicate and say, well, this is what it means to me. This is how it impacts my life. Or, hey, I don't know. You have to go, I have no idea. Let me go research. Let me find out. Let me see what I can figure out about that. But one of the things I'm hoping that we're doing here at WholeLife is beginning to create small communities that people can be a part of inside the larger context of our church that creates a catalyst for personal spiritual development. And when I say that, I'm not talking about small communities that all they do is study the Bible, all they do is just have prayer. I'm talking about small communities that maybe they cycle together, or maybe it's knitting, or maybe it's playing pickleball, whatever it is. It's a group of people that get together and they do that, but they view themselves as more than a group. They view themselves as a community, and that they invite other people into that community. You know, I preached a sermon a couple months ago. It's no secret. I mean, the Surgeon General says there's an epidemic of loneliness in this world. Right. People are lonely right now. They're super lonely. And what's tragic is some of those people go to church every week and they're lonely. So how do we go ahead and create an environment where Christ is, the body of Christ is a friend, is there, is walking with people and encouraging them to live the best life that they can live, and to make a difference in the world, to comfort those that are hurting, to feed the hungry, to clothe those that need clothing, to visit people in jail. How do we create a culture where each person can be the hands and feet of Jesus in the way that they're being called to be the hands and feet? Not everybody's called to go do jail ministry, but everybody's called to do something. Yeah. And so my hope is that as we continue on this journey together here at WholeLife for the next, I don't know, I hope I'm here till I retire. I don't think I can hit 37 years because I'm 49. That would put me at a pretty, I don't think anybody wants me there that long. But my point is, I hope over the years that I'm here, that we'll continue to grow a culture of being the hands and feet of Jesus that Andy already had. That I'm inheriting that. Yeah. But I hope to grow it further and really create a community of people that just genuinely care about each other. That not only that I'm saying I love you, go love your world, but that as they're running to people, that whether they're saying the words or not, they're loving people and then encouraging that other person to go and love their world too.
Beautiful. And I appreciate that. Thank you for your time. I just have a one or two more quick questions, or maybe not as quick.
But you're talking to me, so it might
that'll be up to you. Yeah. No worries. Like I said, long format.
You do have editing software, right?
We do. But no, we're all good here. Following up through what you just said, and I've asked this to several when I've spoken to pastors in different conferences and different districts, and we've used and talked about the word discipleship quite a bit on this podcast, right? I firmly believe, and I'm still on the journey, that it's all about making disciples that make disciples of Jesus. And so what does that process look like here? And I understand every church, no matter its size, whether it's a WholeLife Church or whether it's a pastor in a church in a district of 2 or 3 churches, every church is in a journey. With that understood, somebody comes in, I invite my family member or friend who, as you were alluding to, don't know Jesus or are just starting to understand Jesus, or perhaps a former church member who's left the church and now they're coming back. What does the discipleship process look like for WholeLife? Yeah. What are things that you are doing well? And in fairness, what are things that you would like to improve on? And granted, you've been here 3 years. You're still working on it.
So the discipleship process for me looks like this. It's having every person who's a part of this church understand that being a disciple involves following Jesus and inviting other people to follow Jesus. So that process to me looks like, number one, you invite people into community. So whether that's as somebody attending church here, if you're here on Sabbath morning worship with us and you see somebody that you don't recognize, it's greeting them, acknowledging their presence. If they don't have anybody that they're with, inviting them to be in community with you. Maybe that's, well, hey, sit here beside me, or hey, would you like to grab a meal with me afterwards? Would you, but inviting. So first step for me in this whole discipleship thing is inviting into community. That's what Christ always did. Come follow me, inviting into community. So inviting to community is first. After that, it's listening, going back to that word. So you invite into community, and then rather than saying to the person, hey, so glad you're here, let me go ahead and explain to you this theological thing or that theological thing, or it's, hey, tell me about you. Where are you at on your journey? What's going on with you? What's important to you? What do you know about Jesus? What do you wish you knew about Jesus? So it's listening. So it's inviting the community, listening, asking clarifying questions as you listen. So that's, those two kind of almost are one, but they're two different things in a way. So inviting the community, listening, asking clarifying questions that are genuine, that you really want to help the person know, and then providing resources as requested or as you notice they could be used. Oh man, I've been really struggling financially. Oh, would you be interested in the financial literacy class that WholeLife that this small community is doing over here? Would you be interested in, maybe you're not interested. Maybe you're about to be evicted. Do you need to talk to our church and see if there's some sort of assistance that we can help you with? Here at WholeLife, we're really blessed that we have a pastor that this is what they do, and they know a lot of resources in this community. So you can, let me introduce you to Anderline, and she can go ahead and help you with this. But it's, again, inviting the community, listen, ask clarifying questions, provide resources requesting, and rinse and repeat. And then the same thing when it comes to your journey with Christ is being in community with him, listening to him, asking him clarifying questions about what he wants from you, and repeating and taking the resources that Christ brings your way. And so for me, that's the process. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate discipleship. It is genuinely, for me, discipleship is following Jesus wherever he leads. That is it. And Jesus will lead you to the people that need to know him if you give him permission to do that. In my life, when I wasn't a pastor and as a pastor, I just asked God to bring the people into my life that he needs to be in my life. And it's amazing how Christ does that.
Yeah.
And so here at WholeLife, what I need to do in my lead pastor position is create resources for the people that are attending my church for the needs that they may be encountering. Financial literacy. Maybe it's English as a second language. Maybe it's understanding your Bible. Maybe it's understanding the book of Daniel and Revelation. Maybe it is, it's how to share your testimony. Maybe it's how to be a good friend. Maybe it's how to be a good parent. But my job is to try to create different resources so that when one of my family members here at WholeLife comes and says, hey, Ken, I've got a friend who's going through a divorce. What can the church do for them? I can say, oh, there's this resource, there's that resource. Tell your friend about that. And by the way, they might need you to go with them to some of those things. Maybe they don't want to be the person that knows nobody in the room. Maybe you can go with them. But I'm a big believer that true discipleship is not a bunch of pastors doing things. It's a church doing things together.
Yeah. I appreciate that. The book, I shared the book with you. I've read the book. I've shared the book with everybody. It's a very popular book right now by John Mark Comer, Practicing the Way. And I've told people, as for me, there's nothing in that book that I would say you and I don't know technically.
Yeah.
But the way that he has written it and opened it up and reaffirmed and challenged in some other ways, the way he writes in that book, and I've read several of his books, has really empowered me in that essence of discipleship. I'm just going to be very transparent here. And I want to encourage people to buy that book. And it's, there's a lot of principles of what you've been saying there that ultimately following Jesus, being a disciple of Jesus in the personal level is being formed in the likeness of Jesus to love God and to love people more.
Yep.
That's what I'm getting at. And when you love people more, then you empower those people to love God and love people more as well, as Jesus did. And then you teach them the ways of Jesus as you're following the ways of Jesus. Is that fair to say?
Totally.
I want to thank you for your time. I have one last question for you. I thought this would be a fun question to ask you as we close. Ken, if you could only preach one more sermon here at WholeLife, or let's even go further. If this was your last sermon, not necessarily because you're going to die. I don't want to be morbid here. But it's just your last sermon.
But if I was.
But if you were.
Okay.
If you had just one last sermon you were going to preach, what would be the passage and why?
It'd be Philippians 3. Paul says that he considers everything rubbish compared to knowing Christ. And at pretty much every church that I've pastored, I have a sermon that I do as my last sermon there. And it's always titled the same thing, When All Is Said and Done. There's a great song by Jeff Moore in the Distance, which from a long time ago called When All Is Said and Done. And in the song, Jeff basically sings that when the music fades into the past, when my days of life are done, what will be remembered of where I've come when all is said and done. And then he basically says, you can forget my name, you can forget the songs I've sung, but remember the truth of Jesus' love when all is said and done. And one of the things that has become apparent to me as a pastor, as just a human being, is that you can be at a church for a really long time or a short time, and 3 to 5 years after you're done, there are people who will remember you, but life goes on.
Yeah.
And, all the places I've pastored in the past, I'm sure if I went back, there'd be 1 or 2 people that would be like, oh, hey, Ken. But in the times when I have gone back, I've just noticed like it's different. There's a new pastor there. They're doing their thing, and it's good. But in the end, what doesn't matter is whether you remember my name, whether you remember even the sermons I've preached. But because what's that? The old saying is that people don't remember what they say, but they remember how you made them feel. And I truly, for me, my last sermon in a place, and if I knew that I only had one sermon left, it would be just remember the truth of Jesus' love. That's it. It's everything else is rubbish. Everything else is going to burn. Everything else really, truly is out of control. But the one thing that is within everybody's grasp is Christ's love. It's there. It's been given. It's not something you have to earn. It's not something that it's there. And so I love Philippians 3 because it to me, the chapter covers almost the complete gospel in one chapter. So, it even talks about death in there. And, Paul talks about that he's run the race, not that he's achieved everything, but he strives on for the prize that's ahead. And so, yeah, that's what I would preach on.
I love it. Ken, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your ministry, and may God continue to bless you, your family, and your ministry here at WholeLife and beyond.
I really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Thank you. Well, I hope that you were blessed by this conversation with Pastor Ken. I want to thank him for his time, transparency, for his leadership, and just for his heart for people. May God continue to bless you, your family, and ministry. And as always, thank you all for listening, subscribing, and sharing the Restore podcast. Until next time, God bless.
Thank you for listening to this Restore podcast. We hope you've been blessed. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of our inspiring episodes.